Hi everybody, this is Bastiaan, and today we're going to take another look at the Cochrane gambit. In a previous game I played against an engine called Chesterfield, but I've noticed that in the last 5 seconds the screen went blank. So just to complete that game, here you can see the final moves of the engine. So rook b4 check, and this was the forced mate, and then the screen went black. And the continuation was king to a6, queen c7, threatening mate, and then came the desperation moves. Queen takes f2 check, king recaptures, rook check, king recaptures, rook checks, king recaptures, then bishop check, king recaptures, pawn takes pawn, and finally the mate, queen d5, checkmate. So I hope that clears that up. So on to the next game, and the next game I played against another engine, not Firefly as I said before, but Ant 606 Leiden. And Ant 606 is rated around 2400, so it's much higher rated than the previous engine. So game starts e4, e5, knight f3, knight f6, knight takes pawn on e5, d6, and knight takes pawn on Cochrane gambit. Now keep in mind that if this pawn move isn't played, black instead plays symmetrically, we can still play something in the spirit of a Cochrane gambit. Knight takes pawn check, and here your opponent might fall for this trick once or twice. How to recapture, because we are threatening a fort between queen and rook. This is obviously unsound, but if king recaptures, then we have queen h5 check. If g6, queen d5 check, and any which way white will recapture the lost piece. It will be up a pawn. Also the king will be unsafe. If black plays inaccurately, we play queen h5 check, king f6, queen f3 check, trying to recapture the knight, king e5, d4 check, king takes pawn, queen e5 to lock out the king, knight c6, bishop e3 mate. So black will lose his knight and a pawn and get a poor king position. Correct defense after a knight takes pawn on f7 is queen e7. So black shouldn't recapture immediately, and after that knight takes rook, knight c3 check and threatening the queen, bishop e2, take, and white can continue in the spirit with the Cochrane gambit, but instead of sacrificing a knight, he has sacrificed the exchange, so a queen versus a rook and a knight. So this is the best continuation for black if he finds it. This wasn't played, just mentioning the variation. d6 and a Cochrane gambit, knight takes pawn on f7. So now of course it's best for black to recapture with the king. King takes knight, bishop c4, so we are following book. Now the book move is pawn to d5, but again king e8 was played. So if pawn d5, take, knight takes, queen f3, and check and so forth. But none of this was played. King e8 was played. Most engines actually prefer this move. So d4, so we've seen this before. We're sacrificing the pawn on e4 to get an open field. Open up the e-file. So if knight takes, we castle, and we will play knight to c3 and rook to e1, and white has at least equalized. Black's king will be stuck in the center. But bishop e7 was played, protecting the king. So we castle. Now it's too late for black to recapture the pawn, because if knight takes pawn, we can play queen h5 check, and if g6 to block, which is best, queen d5, threatening both the knight and a check. So if knight g5, take, mate, to save the knight, doesn't work. If knight f6, check, check, check. Point is to gain a minor piece. Bishop takes bishop. If queen recaptures bishop, we can take on the bishop on e7. So that's why knight takes on e4 cannot no longer be played. So knight to c3, a5, a4, knight b4, queen e2. So I'm bringing the queen into the center, but I still need to protect the c2 square. Bishop g4, pawn f3, bishop retreats, e5, knight retreats, f4, pawn takes pawn, and now I could recapture, which is fine, but instead I want to develop in order to attack the enemy king. Knight to b5, bringing a piece into the attack, and I don't mind sacrificing a pawn or two to open up lines for the enemy king. So black takes the free pawn, queen h5 check. Now here are a few possibilities for black. Let's see what black can do. So king f8 doesn't work because of queen f7 mate. g6, then we get queen to e5, the point being an attack on the knight. Also threatening knight takes pawn on c7 with a fork. So g6 is a poor defense. So if knight f6 to block, we get knight takes pawn on g7 check. So king d7 is played. Queen to e5, same idea. King to c6, and now queen takes pawn isn't such a good idea, because if queen takes pawn, black can simply play bishop to f6. I will need to move the queen, and black can recapture his pawn with tempo, and I will have lost my initiative. Black is better here, so we can't take on the pawn just yet. Instead, knight d4 check, king b6, Let's find out if I can take the pawn at this point. Black will play bishop to f6 again, and he has a fork between two pieces, so that would be a horrible continuation for white. Bishop e3 to protect the knight, but also to gain a discovered check. c5, and now rook a to d1. And the idea behind rook a to d1 is that after pawn takes knight, I can play rook takes. Black will lose the queen, because the queen cannot move anywhere to get rid of an attack of the rook, because I get a discovered check. However, engines have analyzed this move, and apparently rook a to d1 leads to a draw, so it was the right idea, but better would be c3 with an attack on the knight. So if pawn takes knight at this point, we can get bishop takes pawn check, again a free piece, a free knight instead of a free queen, which would have kept the edge for white. This wasn't played, however. Rook a to d1, and Ant continues on the drawing line, plays queen to d6, so I play queen takes pawn, queen to f6, queen to g3, knight to h6, f5, and after knight takes pawn, you get knight takes knight, bishop takes, rook to d7, rook a to c8, and this is actually the draw that started with the move rook to d1. Fortunately for me, Ant plays an inaccurate move. Instead of knight takes pawn, he plays knight to f7, and this gives a huge edge for white. So now I can play knight to b5, with the idea of, if black plays a random move, say h6, you get queen c7 check with mate in a few moves. For instance, king a6, rook check, bishop takes rook, knight takes bishop check, king a7, bishop takes checkmate. It's one possible continuation. So a random move cannot be played. Knight e5 was played to block queen to c7. So now bishop to g5, threatening the queen. If queen takes bishop, we get queen takes knight, so we're exchanging, but this allows once again queen to c7 check. Also we're having an attack on the rook, so if bishop d8 to prevent the check and the forced mate, we can take on the rook on h8. So queen takes bishop on g5 is losing for black. Instead black tries queen to g7, which may be the best move but leads to a fork. Pawn f6, forking the two pieces. Bishop takes, rook takes, so I'm up a minor piece. Knight to c6. Now of course queen move cannot be played because black's queen is covering it. Now engines have determined that the best move is rook to f7. Blocking the protection on c7, which would lead to, say, if queen takes rook, bishop takes queen, so that can be played. Instead, if rook f7, queen e5, hoping to exchange pieces, we get bishop to f4, and at this point the bishop will take over from the queen. Queen needs to move. She cannot move to a square to protect c7 because of this rook. Bishop check, king a6, knight to d4 check, b5 to block, pawn takes check, king b7, pawn takes check, knight takes pawn, bishop takes check, queen takes rook, knight takes, and now there are possibilities for check on b3, c7, or d6 if king takes knight, king takes knight, queen d6 check, king b7, and queen to b6 checkmate. This would have been a nice continuation and probably the best if I found it. Sadly, I didn't spot the rook move, rook to f7. I spotted something else instead. I play queen to e5. The idea of that is to play rook takes knight check with a discovered attack on the queen, which works as well. But after bishop to e6, to block that, I continue with a very unexpected move. I can play queen takes bishop, because of course the knight is threatening the queen. But after that, black can recapture on g5, and I'm left with no attack. So that's not the point. The move I thought of is queen takes pawn check, sacrificing the queen for a pawn. And this looks very odd at first, but we will see in a few moments that it's actually a very logical move, because the continuation will be more or less forced and lead to a winning endgame for white. So let's just see all the variations at this point. King a6, remove from the check, will lead to knight c7 checkmate. So of course this won't be played. King recaptures the queen, so I'm down the queen for a pawn. Now bishop to e3 check. Two possibilities. King takes bishop, then we get a mate e1, pawn to b3. Cannot be played. Knight to d4 to block the check is forced. So bishop takes check. Again, two possibilities. If king c6, we get rook takes check, king d7, rook d6 check, king c8, bishop e6 check, king b8, rook d8 check, rook takes rook, bishop e5 check, rook d6, bishop takes check, queen c7, bishop takes check, and mate. In other words, this is a forced mate. So king c6 cannot be played, and of course the engine doesn't play it. Instead, of course, black regains his material. So he's back up the exchange. b3 check, king d5 forced, c4 check. Two possibilities. If king e4, we get knight d6 check and mate, so that cannot be played. King c6 instead, rook takes check, king d7, and the point now, of course, is to regain the queen, being up a pawn and having forced an endgame. But we cannot take on the queen just yet because of king takes rook. So one more in-between move, rook d6 check, to enjoy protection from the knight. King to c8, and finally bishop takes queen. So now we have forced more or less an endgame. Rook g8, rook to f1. Of course, white shouldn't be cared because of rook takes bishop, because of rook f8 mate. So rook a6 instead is played. So all black's pieces are locked, and I will change them all. Rook f8 check. So we recapture. Rook takes rook, and recapture again. So I'm up 2 pawns and 1 minor piece. King b8. Knight takes pawn, so I'm sacking the knight for a pawn. Black recaptures. Bishop takes knight, and pawn takes. So now I have a winning endgame, and I will get a few of my pawns across. Now the rest of the game needs no annotation, I'm just pushing the pawns for mates. And finally, queen to g8 checkmate. So that was my game against the ANT606 engine. So I hope you enjoyed watching this game and learned a thing or two about the Cochrane gambit. And thanks for watching. Please leave a comment and have a great evening.